Her mask cracked for half a second before reforming. Routine assessment. I smiled. Right. Section 12, Covenant Enforcement. No entry without notice. You've read that, right? She froze, then hissed. Emergency board meeting. Thursday. Be there. The so-called meeting looked like a courtroom run by toddlers. Delilah with her PowerPoint, preserving community standards, showing drone photos of my house like it was a military compound. I let her finish, then calmly handed out copies of the actual HOA covenants, highlighted, tab, and lawyer approved. By the time I cited Colorado Statute 38-33-209 aloud, her smile was cracking like thin ice. Your meeting, I said, violates 3 state statutes and your own bylaws. A retired attorney in the back confirmed it. Meeting adjourned. Or postponed. But she wasn't done. A week later, my truck was gone, towed from my own driveway. A bright orange sticker reading, illegally parked. Final notice. Frank, the retired lawyer, drove me to the impound lot. Predatory towing, he muttered. That's triple damages in court. The next day, flyers appeared in every mailbox. Protect Willowbrook Estates. Stop commercial activity. Photos of my house. Twisted captions. Fake neighbor quotes. A one-woman propaganda campaign designed to bury me under public shame. But this time I wasn't angry. I was focused, because my cameras had caught her again, taking those photos herself at dawn. License plate, timestamp, everything. Delilah had built an empire on fear and paperwork. But she forgot the first rule of warfare. Never corner someone who knows how to win wars. And I was just getting started. When you've spent 20 years moving tanks through war zones, you stop rushing. You stop reacting. You learn that real victory doesn't come from speed. It comes from precision. From patience. From waiting until your enemy walks right into your crosshairs and smiles, thinking they've already won. That's what Delilah Thornberry never understood. Her latest attack, the glossy propaganda flyers she'd stuffed into every mailbox in Willowbrook, wasn't just another act of pettiness. It was a declaration of total war. And the worst part? She left her fingerprints on every single one. It was 5:42 a.m. when my cameras caught her in the act. The footage was grainy but clear enough to see the pearls glinting at her neck, the steam from her breath curling in the cold dawn air. She moved like someone rehearsing a ritual she'd performed 100 times before. White Mercedes idling 3 houses down, headlights off, clipboard tucked under her arm. One by one, she slipped the flyers into mailboxes, pausing after each to look around. But this time, she was being watched. When I pulled the footage into my laptop that morning, I didn't get angry. I didn't curse or throw anything. I just sat there in silence, coffee cooling beside me, staring at the woman who thought she owned the neighborhood. I'd seen insurgents make the same mistake overseas, underestimate the quiet man taking notes. I sent the file to Frank. Frank Kowalski had been a defense attorney before retirement. Silver hair, calm tone, the patience of a man who'd seen too many people destroy themselves on the witness stand. When he picked up the phone, I could hear the slow rustle of paper on his desk. Got something you want to see, I said. By the time he arrived at my house an hour later, I had the footage queued up. We watched in silence as Delilah moved from mailbox to mailbox. At the end of the clip, Frank leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and smiled. A small, satisfied smile. She's finished, he said quietly. Defamation, harassment, trespassing, misuse of HOA property. And if I dig deep enough, I'll find financial fraud too. Women like her never get their hands dirty without dipping into the till. I nodded. What's next? He tapped his pen on the desk, each click sharp and deliberate. We file. Not next week. Not tomorrow. Today. Let's make her fight on our field for once. By noon, the paperwork was in motion. 48 hours later, a courier handed Delilah Thornberry a thick envelope stamped Kowalski and Associates. Notice of litigation. Neighbors said she froze in her driveway when she read it. The woman who'd strutted around this neighborhood like a monarch now stood motionless beside her Mercedes, pale as snow, lips moving but no sound coming out. The moment that envelope hit her hand, everything shifted. Suddenly, her confidence was gone. She tried to rally the board, but cracks appeared immediately. 2 members resigned the same day, one of them leaving a voicemail on my phone that I'll never delete. Marcus, she made us falsify board minutes. I'm sorry. I didn't know she'd take it this far. The 3rd member, a timid accountant named Reynolds, started avoiding her calls entirely. By the next HOA meeting, Delilah's empire was fracturing from within. She showed up late, clutching a binder thick enough to stop a bullet, trying to project authority. But the mask was slipping. Her hands trembled when she spoke. The PowerPoint she prepared to defend the board's integrity flickered and froze halfway through, leaving her glaring at a blank screen while whispers filled the room. For the first time, she looked small. Meanwhile, I fortified my position, literally. 4 12-inch concrete barriers, anchored in rebar, now marked the edge of my circular driveway. They were smooth, symmetrical, and fully permitted. A legal fortress. When she called the city to complain, the inspectors arrived, clipboard in hand. They spent 10 minutes checking measurements and permits, then shrugged. All compliant, one of them said. I could see her face turn red from my front window. That night, her Mercedes idled in front of my house for a full half hour. She didn't get out, just sat there, staring at the barriers through the windshield before finally driving off into the darkness. The next morning, my inbox pinged. Frank had news. Bingo, the email began. Attached were scans of HOA financial statements, obtained legally through discovery, showing something delicious. Administrative fees redirected from HOA accounts to a company called Thornberry Realty Group, LLC. Her company. Frank called 10 minutes later. His voice carried the kind of excitement lawyers usually reserve for closing arguments. She's been funneling association money to her own business for 3 years, he said. Printing, advertising, maintenance contracts, all fake. I've got checks with her signature. He paused. Marcus, she's cooked. You wanted to go nuclear. I smiled. No need. I'll let the neighborhood do it for us. The next morning, every door in Willowbrook had a plain envelope taped to it. The same cream color Delilah used for her violation letters. Inside each, residents found photocopies of her expense reports, bank transfers, and falsified meeting notes. I didn't sign them. Didn't have to. By sunrise, the neighborhood was buzzing. By 10 a.m., someone had posted the documents on the community Facebook page. By noon, a local news van was parked at the gate. The headline that hit that evening was simple and perfect. HOA president accused of embezzlement and harassment in Willowbrook Estates. Her face was on TV, makeup perfect, expression cracking. She tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but the station had already verified the documents with the county clerk's office. That night, I stood at my window, watching her porch lights flicker. Neighbors gathered outside in small clusters, whispering. One by one, they turned their backs on her house and went inside. By the next morning, her McMansion looked deserted. Curtains drawn, fountain dry. 3 days later, I woke to the sound of a U-Haul engine rumbling. Delilah was leaving. She wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy, her hair tied back in a tight knot. She moved quickly, tossing boxes into the back of her Mercedes. 2 men loaded furniture into the truck, while she barked orders that no one seemed eager to follow. From my front porch, I sipped my coffee and watched in silence. The same spot where I'd once found concrete barriers blocking my driveway. The same driveway where her arrogance had started all this. When she turned and saw me, our eyes met for one brief, electric second. No words, just pure, unfiltered hatred. And maybe, somewhere beneath it, the faint glimmer of humiliation. She got in her car, slammed the door, and drove off without a word. The HOA board met the following week without her. Reynolds, the nervous accountant, was elected interim president. His first act was to issue a formal apology to the entire community. His second was to suspend all pending fines and investigations until a full review of past board activity is completed. When he approached me afterward, his handshake was weak but genuine. Marcus, he said, I don't expect forgiveness, but thank you for exposing her. I nodded. Just make sure no one else like her ever runs this place again. He swallowed. We'll try. The lawsuit wrapped up 2 months later. Delilah didn't even show up in person. Her lawyer negotiated a quiet settlement. 2 payments, both sealed by court order. Enough to cover every penny I'd lost, and then some. Frank slid the paperwork across my kitchen table one snowy afternoon. "She's done," he said simply. I stared out the window at the same yard she'd once called a commercial nuisance. The barriers still stood, snow collecting on their edges. "What happens to her now?" I asked. Frank shrugged. "Word is she lost her real estate license. Fraud investigation. She'll probably move, change her name, start over somewhere else." I nodded. "Good. She can start over far away from here." He chuckled. "You know, you could sue the HOA too. Go after the board for negligence." I shook my head. "No, wars have to end somewhere." That night, I walked out to the driveway. The air was crisp, the snow glittering under the porch light. I ran my hand along one of the concrete barriers, cold, solid, immovable. They weren't just blocks anymore. They were monuments. Proof that some people can't be intimidated, no matter how fancy the letterhead. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who'd once brought me that casserole after Delilah had my truck towed, waved from her window. I waved back. For the first time, it felt like this neighborhood was mine too. Willowbrook had finally fallen silent. But peace never feels quite right after a long fight. There's always a hum under the quiet, a leftover tension, like distant thunder after a storm. Sometimes in that silence, I could almost hear her voice again. That clipped tone, that smug politeness. "You're not Willowbrook material, Marcus." And I'd smile to myself, sipping my coffee. Because she was right. I wasn't Willowbrook material. I was something she'd never understand. A man who'd been through real wars. And who'd learned that even in the suburbs, some battles are worth fighting. 2 months later, a reporter called. He'd been covering the HOA scandal and wanted a quote from the man who brought down the queen. I laughed. "No comment," I said, and hung up. Because Delilah Thornberry's downfall wasn't my victory. It was just the inevitable result of arrogance meeting patience. And somewhere, I knew she'd learned that too. That's how you end wars in suburbia. Not with violence, not with revenge, but with paperwork sharper than any blade, and concrete strong enough to outlast memory. Because bureaucracy might build walls, but I build fortresses. Peace did not arrive all at once. It came in careful inches, one quiet morning at a time. A mailbox filled with bills instead of threats. A street without the white Mercedes creeping past at dawn. The cul-de-sac sounded like normal life again. A dog barked. A kid tested a scooter wheel on the curb. Sprinklers rose like clockwork and fell in thin arcs that dissolved into steam. The neighborhood remembered how to breathe. Frank brought the settlement papers in a plain folder. He placed it on my kitchen table like a folded flag. 2 payments, both sealed. Enough to undo the towing costs and the fines. Enough to pay him and still leave me air in the bank. "Congratulations," he said. "You can take the concrete down now." "Soon," I said. He looked past me at the driveway. The barriers sat at perfect intervals, 12 inches thick, rebar set deep. The permits were in a neat stack with the tape measure inside the drawer. It had all been lawful from the start. That was the point. "You do not need them forever," he said. "I know." He nodded and poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. We stood at the window, steam rising between us. The winter light climbed the edges of the blocks and turned them white. The shape of each block cut a clean line across the drive. Mrs. Patterson rang the bell at dusk with a pie and a look that dared me to refuse. She set it on the counter like a medic setting down a bandage. "Eat," she said. "You fought hard. Now eat." I did. Warm cinnamon. Soft crust. It tasted like a house where the air did not strain against the walls. The next week, the board held a real meeting. Full notice. Agenda posted. No tricks. Reynolds stood at the table and read an apology that was shorter than I expected and better for it. All pending fines suspended. An audit underway. Procedures to be followed. Residents would be notified before any meeting called an emergency. When it ended, he came to the back where I waited. His hand was thin and cold. His eyes were honest in a way I had not seen in that room before. "Thank you," he said. "Fix it," I said. "Start with the Kellys." We already did. New swing set. Code compliant. Blue paint. Their daughter chose it. For the first time since moving in, I walked home from an HOA meeting without a weight between my shoulder blades. February softened the edges of the snow. Patches of brown lawn showed at the corners like elbows through an old shirt. I left the street cameras up for a few weeks and then took them down one by one. I kept the ones on the doors. Not fear. Habit. A good perimeter is a quiet mind. Work returned. People called for firewall updates and cable pulls. My circular drive did what it was meant to do. Clients came, parked without blocking, left without incident. I slept full nights. I woke to simple mornings. It felt like a recovery that might hold. On the first warm Saturday in March, I gave in to Frank and moved the blocks back. Not gone, just set them against the side yard to open the curve. I told myself it was practical. The turn would be easier. Snow would be simple next year. The truth was simpler. I could stand to see them, but I no longer needed them where they were. Late that afternoon, Mrs. Patterson called from her porch. Progress. Compromise, I said. Progress, she repeated and raised a glass. The envelope came 3 days later. No return address. My name centered in black type. The paper was heavier than normal mail. My hands felt colder as I carried it inside. I opened it at the kitchen table with a butter knife and slid the contents into the light. One photograph. My house at night. Porch light on. The window shades set halfway like sleeping eyes. The shot was crisp and balanced. Whoever took it knew how to frame a subject in low light. In the foreground, a woman in a black coat stood at my curb with a clipboard in her arms like a shield. Head slightly bowed. Hair pinned tight. The thin line of a smile that never reached her eyes. Delilah. In the dark behind her, along the hedge line, a second figure stood where the shadow seemed to thicken. Broad shoulders, edges cut by low light. A field jacket that belonged to a life I had already put away. The face was turned toward the lens. My height, my shape, me. Except I had been in Denver with Frank at that hour. We had stamped signatures and timed sheets and the tired coffee at a 24-hour diner to show for it. I turned the photograph over. One message in neat black handwriting crossed the back like a piano wire. You are not the only one watching. I called Frank. He told me to bring it. He laid it under a lamp and examined the edges with a jeweler's loupe. Not a home printer, he said. This is lab paper. Clean chemicals. No banding. Can you track it? Maybe. The chain is wide. Big box stores do this by the thousands. But the ink on the back matters. Careful hand. No pressure lapses. Either a calm person or one who practiced. Delilah. He shook his head. She likes to be seen. This is a whisper. He told me to file a report. The detective at the desk logged it without drama. He did not smile. He did not offer panic. He asked if I wanted extra patrols. I said no. He gave me a card with a number and a name and a polite sentence. Call if anything else comes. 3 days later, he returned the photo with a receipt and a brief note. No usable prints. The stamp at the back of the paper was a generic supply code. The envelope had no fingerprints that survived handling. He had done what he could. The rest belonged to luck and time. I put the photo in my safe with the truck title and my discharge papers. The combination felt heavy in my mouth as I recited it. I closed the door and listened to the bolt push into place. The sound was clean. The symbol worked on me. The thing was contained. That is what the brain believes when the door closes. That is what the heart hopes. Nothing happened for a while. The days lined up again. The board sent short emails that sounded like sanity. The Kelly girl shrieked with happy terror as her father pushed her higher on her new swing. I patched a server farm in Commerce City and came home tired and satisfied. I slept. Then the night, sounds changed. It was small at first. A soft weight settling somewhere just outside. Not footsteps. Not a car. A drag through gravel that ended without a bump. I sat up. The digital clock glowed a blunt red number I did not like. I stood by the window and watched the curve of my drive. Nothing moved. No breath fogged the glass. The porch light threw its circle and held it. I told myself the wind had pushed a loose brick along a gutter. That was not a lie. Wind has hands. A yard gathers plenty of small things that can be moved by air. I believed enough to sleep again. The next morning, I found a fine dust of gray on the edge of the driveway where the blocks had sat for months. Not much. A smear. I rubbed it between finger and thumb. It felt like concrete dust and grit. It had no business being there. I had pressure wash the drive after moving the blocks. I already knew that. I did not argue with myself about it. I rinsed it clean and set the hose away. Work reached its spring tempo. People wanted speed and reliability before summer. I spent mornings in warm attics and afternoons labeling ports and making checklists that calmed the nerves. The body likes work that ends with a finished shape. Is a kind of prayer. Is also good medicine. That week I noticed a reflection in the front door glass on my way out. It lasted no more than a breath. The angle and the light made my shirt look like a field jacket. The back of my neck tightened before my eyes caught up and corrected the lie. Blue chambray. No shoulder patches. No canvas. No smell of machine oil in the weave. I laughed in the driveway and shook it off. Night brought the sound again. A soft shift of mass along the ground. A pause. A faint push. I sat in the chair by the window and listened to my own house breathe. The refrigerator sighed and clicked. The heater coughed once and fell quiet. Nothing else moved. I slept in the chair without meaning to and woke with a line pressed across my cheek from the upholstery seam. I checked the cameras. The feeds were clean. The lenses held a thin film of dust that the morning light made obvious. I wiped them with a microfiber cloth and patted each dome like a dog. The one facing the street did not exist anymore. I caught myself looking for it. The habit would take longer to unlearn than the war had taken to win. 2 nights later, I dreamed of concrete pouring in a slow gray ribbon across the mouth of my drive. It set without cracks. It cured in seconds with a skin like cold water becoming ice. When I woke, the taste of dust was in my mouth. My jaw ached from keeping it clenched. I went outside in a t-shirt and stood barefoot on the slab. The cold went up through the pads of my feet like a wire. The air had a smell I did not like. New cement has a metallic ghost in it. This was that smell. Thin, real. I crouched and pressed my fingers to the surface. Dry. I lifted my hand and saw a faint ghost of powder on the skin that could have been pollen or fear. I did not tell Frank. I did not want the conversation in his work voice. I did not want the rational explanation that would take the tension out of the line I was following. When you have moved tanks, you learn that sometimes your nerves see a problem before your eyes do. You hold still and let them show you. The photograph came back to mind in quiet moments. The field jacket in the hedge behind Delilah. The white line of his cheek. My shape. Not me. A reflection printed into the paper by a hand that wanted me to see it. The ink on the back did not look like her handwriting from the violation letters and the clipped notes she used to leave under wipers. The loops were measured. The pressure was even. The message was straight. You are not the only one watching. It did not read like a threat. It read like a fact delivered clean. April opened like a fist. Buds along the maple swelled and showed green at the seam. The HOA audit arrived in a neat 3-page PDF. The money Delilah had siphoned into her business accounts was listed with numbers instead of adjectives. Refund checks would follow. The board proposed term limits and double notices and a vote counter who did not live on our street. I closed the document and sat very still. It felt like a wound had been washed, stitched, and bandaged. It was not healed. It would be, if we kept our hands off it. I moved the blocks to the back corner of the side yard in May. This assembly would wait. For now, they lived under a tarp with a tie rope cinched hard to a stake. I did not like seeing them in the open. I told myself the tarp kept them from becoming an eyesore. It also kept them from calling to me. The sounds at night grew more distinct. Gravel clicked once or twice, then a soft, stubborn drag, then stillness. I checked the gate and found a new bite mark in the wood where the latch met the post. The metal was clean. The wood was fresh at the split. I shook the gate. It held. I oiled the hinges and went to bed. At 2 a.m, the doorbell camera caught movement at the edge of the porch. A shadow crossed the far corner. Not a neighbor. Not a cat. Taller. The outline had a shoulder slope I knew. The freeze frame showed nothing a court would accept. My heart accepted it anyway. I watched the clip 6 times and then closed the laptop and breathed through my nose until my pulse came down. I slept with the hall light on and woke ashamed of it and did it again the next night. By June, I had talked myself into disassembly. I cut the rebar with a diamond wheel, while the afternoon sun turned my shirt into a wet rag and made the air shimmer above the drive. Concrete broke with a sound like a giant biting bread. I hauled pieces into a rented truck and strapped them down with tight belts. I did not look at the house as I drove away. I watched my mirrors like I was hauling ammunition. At the yard, the operator waved me into a bay and raised a chain hook with board hands. The blocks came off in slow arcs and vanished into a long mouth of rubble and dust. When it was done, he lifted a hand in a gesture that meant nothing and everything. Go on. You're lighter now. I slept well that night and the one after. On the third night, the house woke me with a small sound at the edge of hearing. Not gravel, not a gate, a weight settling. The same sound concrete makes when it finds its place after a long ride. I did not move. I listened until my ears warmed with effort. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I got up and went to the window. The driveway was empty. The curb was clean. The light lay across it like water. At the curb, I saw a line. It was pale and fine and not more than a finger's width. It ran from one side of the mouth to the other, a seam that had no right to exist. I went out in bare feet and crouched to see it better. It was not chalk. It was not paint. It was a line of dust pressed into the pores of the surface. I rubbed it with the pad of my thumb, and a thin cloud lifted into the air. The smell was exactly what my dream had promised. New mix. Cold cure. It faded as I stood. My phone buzzed. A number I did not know. I answered. Silence. A breath that might have been my own returned through a loop. Then a soft, clean click. The line went dead. The next morning, there were 3 glossy flyers in my mailbox. Not violation letters. Real estate ads for houses in other neighborhoods with fountains and gates, and a sentence about community values printed under a smiling family. The business name on the bottom belonged to a new agent. The color palette belonged to someone else. The layout belonged to Delilah. The design bone was the same. Even a ghost keeps a style. I checked the security feeds. Nothing useful. A moth. A car turning at the far end of the street. My own face looking down into a lens as I adjusted the angle by half a degree. Frank stopped by, without calling, and stood in my entry with a look that said he had prepared 2 different conversations and would throw one away depending on which way I twitched. Any more mail? He said. A few ads, I said. A phone call with a click. He nodded like a man who had heard this flavor of quiet before. You still have the photo, he said. In the safe. Leave it there. I intend to. He looked past me at the drive and at the clean mouth where the blocks had stood. Ow, is the silence too loud sometimes? He smiled at that. That is normal. He left me with a tin of coffee and 2 dumb jokes. He knows I'll be useful. Summer burned the lawns flat. The cul-de-sac smelled like hot coins in the afternoon. Nights softened to a salt breeze from sprinklers and distant traffic. The sound came and went. A weight settling. A pause. A breath. Sometimes I heard it, and sometimes I slept through it. A person can get used to almost anything if it does not kill him. In late August, the doorbell camera caught something that made me set both hands flat on the table. A figure stood at the end of my drive for 6 seconds. The lens flare from the streetlight cut a halo along one side of the body and left the face in a pool of dark. The shoulders were square. The head had a tilt I recognized from photos of myself that I do not like. The outline turned slightly toward the hedge as if listening to someone who stood just out of frame. Then it stepped right and vanished from the circle of light. I scrubbed through the clip frame by frame. In 2 frames, near the middle, I could see it more clearly. The edge of a clipboard against a black coat. A strand of hair pinned behind an ear in a pattern I'd seen on white mornings when frost was still soft on her lawn. The street was empty by the 3rd frame. The clip ended with a moth and my own reflection in the glass as I opened the door 2 minutes later. I did not send that clip to Frank. I copied it to a thumb drive and put it in the safe with the photo. The safe felt heavier when it closed. September arrived with high skies and a new sharpness in the air. The board mailed a notice about elections and term limits. The Kelly girl learned to pump her legs on the swing and did not need pushing anymore. Mrs. Patterson brought over soup when I looked thinner than she liked. I ate and told her it was good. It was The last thing came on a night with no wind and a moon that made clean edges on everything it touched. I took the trash to the curb and turned to go back inside. The sound came from behind me, a soft shift along the ground. Not close, not far. It felt placed like a hand setting down a tool. I looked back at the mouth of the drive. 3 concrete blocks stood across it. Not full size, not anchored. The pieces I had hauled away had been larger. These are like small monuments, set shoulder to shoulder. Each was the same height as my knee. Each had a powdery edge. Each left a faint bloom of dust like chalk on the concrete. It felt like my blood went cold from the inside out. I walked toward them with the careful steps you use when you do not want to wake a sleeping thing. I stopped 3 feet away and looked for seams, for drag marks, for a footprint. There were none. The surface under them was clean. The dust halo ended at the exact edge of each block. I reached out and pressed my hand against the face of the one on the left. It was cold, real. The smell that rose from it was the smell of wet mix left to dry. I pushed. It did not move. It did not even shiver all the way down. I looked left and right along the street. Every porch was dark. The Patterson house had a warm rectangle at one window where a lamp burned over a book. No curtains twitched. No car rolled. No engine idled. The night was plain. I went to the porch and took the sledge from the closet where I keep what I may someday need. I came back down the steps and raised the head over my shoulder. I brought it down on the center block with a clean swing that a drill instructor would still nod at. The sound should have been a crack. It was a dull ring, as if I had hit a bell wrapped in wool. The block did not split. The head bounced and stung my hands. I swung again. The sound was the same. The block did not chip. The dust that lifted smelled like new work. I lowered the sledge and stood very still. For a long time, the only sound I heard was the ringing in my palms. I set the sledge aside and walked to the safe. I spun the combination with deliberate fingers and took out the photograph. I brought it to the porch and held it up next to the blocks, as if a picture would give me instruction. The porch light threw both into warm color. The face of the block looked blank and patient. The woman in the photo did not look at the camera. She looked toward the hedge where the shadow of the man stood. I turned the photograph over and read the line again. You are not the only one watching. From afar, into the street, a soft engine started. It did not rev. It idled the way a careful driver idles when she does not want to be rude. A white shape turned under the streetlight and paused. For a second, the light scattered across the hood and made a familiar glare. The car stopped at the corner and waited. Then it rolled on and did not return. The next morning, the blocks were gone. The driveway held no marks. The dust was not there. The air smelled like nothing. I did not call Frank. I did not call the detective. I moved like a man who had chosen to put weight on a leg that had a high. The third time I found concrete barriers blocking my driveway, I didn't yell or call the cops. I called my army buddy and said 5 words that would change everything. I need something permanently immovable. It was a freezing December morning in Colorado. 6 a.m. steam rose from my untouched coffee mug, while 3 gray monoliths stood across my driveway like prison walls. That sharp scent of wet cement and diesel filled the air. Delilah Thornberry thought she was harassing a helpless, middle-aged veteran into submission. What she didn't know was that she'd just declared war on a man who'd spent 20 years moving tanks and artillery for Uncle Sam. 6 months earlier, I thought I'd finally found peace. 52, newly divorced, starting an IT consulting business from home. My circular driveway, my small kingdom of independence, was the reason I bought the house. Clients could park easily, no one blocked, no trouble. I'd read every line of the HOA documents. Nothing prohibited home-based work. Then came Delilah. 48, perfectly bleached smile, white Mercedes polished like a holy relic. HOA president for 3 straight terms, because no one else wanted to deal with her. The kind of woman who lived to write violation notices like love letters. Our first encounter, she appeared in my driveway like a ghost in heels. No knock, no hello. Just a clipboard and the sentence that started the war. You need to move that commercial truck immediately. I looked at my Ford F-150, same model as half the men on my street. Ma'am, that's my personal vehicle. Her pen clicked like a trigger. Used for commercial purposes. Documented. And with that, she turned and left. 3 days later, a $150 fine appeared in my mailbox, followed by a $500 threat if I didn't stop operating a business. I spent 2 nights buried in legal documents. Nothing supported her claim until I found it. Page 47. A vague clause about commercial vehicles so broad it could ban pizza delivery. So, I paid under protest and started planning. Cameras went up. Logs kept. Every move documented. She wanted to fight. I give her a war of evidence and patience. Then one night, my cameras caught her, 11:47 p.m., measuring my driveway with surveyor's tape like she was preparing an artillery strike. Her Mercedes hidden 3 houses down. Clipboard glowing under infrared light. The next morning, I confronted her. Funny thing, I said. Didn't know midnight surveying was part of HOA policy.